When the British were historically the largest military power in the world, it was largely thanks to their navy. Being an island nation with so many colonies, it only made sense that they would need a vast and powerful fleet to supply their colonies as well as protect them. But when you have colonies on each continent, you need to make sure that your fleet can also supply and protect itself. So the British often colonized small islands in the middle of the ocean to serve as naval bases, or at the very least convenient pit stops. I mean, if you look at these maps of the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans, Britain basically had the majority of the islands in them at their height of power. They could always stop somewhere. Europe, though, had a more unique situation for the British. The British stereotypically acted disinterested in continental affairs since they were an island. They were their own thing clearly, and not a part of Europe. But they still obviously cared to some extent since most of their rivals were on the mainland. Having your powerful rivals next door meant that there had to be some way to keep them in check. So, being a naval power, Britain at various times controlled many tiny islands off the coast of mainland Europe, as well as the famous Rock of Gibraltar on the Iberian coast. They were perfect for everything previously mentioned: naval bases, supply stations, and in many cases, they were well fortified. Gibraltar had always been an example of a famous fortified fortress, even before the British acquired it in 1704. As a result, there have been other places calling themselves a Second Gibraltar. Luxembourg for a time was known for its many fortifications and was nicknamed the Gibraltar of the North. I want to talk about Britain's northern Gibraltar, or at least its potential northern Gibraltar, Heligoland. Heligoland, or Helgoland in German, is a name given to a set of two islands about 70 kilometers off the German coastline in the North Sea. The bigger island is usually also called Heligoland, while the smaller island is named Dune. During the Napoleonic Wars, France was attempting to isolate Britain economically through the continental system, basically cut off its trade. Naturally, this made places like Gibraltar even more important for the British than ever. It also led to the British trying to find more islands they could capture. In the early 1800s, they captured Malta from the French to secure their access into the Mediterranean. And then in 1807, the British captured Heligoland from Denmark-Norway to help secure their access into the North Sea and Baltic Sea. In the moment, Heligoland worked as a second Gibraltar for the British. Visually, the main island had large cliff sides on the western and southwestern sides, which would be good defensively against a potential French naval invasion. Furthermore, there were both French allies and enemies in Scandinavia, so if the French ever did manage to build a naval force to meddle in Scandinavia, Heligoland would serve as an inconvenient obstacle. Then of course, it's far enough from the coast to be a difficult place to capture from the mainland, but close enough to be a nuisance for the French on the mainland. As an added bonus, the islands are also near Hanover, which is where the British royal family is from and still simultaneously is in charge of. Well, Napoleon took it, but you know what I mean. In 1814, the British signed the Treaty of Kiel with Denmark-Norway to permanently acquire the two islands. Napoleon would be defeated that same year, and then again in 1815. With the French problem settled, the nature of Heligoland changed. While it worked as a temporary northern Gibraltar against the French, with them out of the way, there was no longer a serious rival to the British Navy in the area. As a result, while Heligoland could have become a major naval base, the British didn't bother to fully fortify the island. Heligoland's use further diminished when Queen Victoria took the British throne in 1837, which resulted in Hanover being split off since they didn't allow female sovereigns. However, the strategic situation would once again change. Prussia finished fully unifying Germany in 1871, establishing the German Empire and eclipsing France as the main military power of mainland Europe. In the 1880s, Germany was trying to build its own colonial empire, trying to make up for its relatively late start, and as a result, started to make rivalries with the other powers. They organized the Berlin Conference, which set up the scramble for Africa, dividing the continent among the European colonial powers, or at least setting it in motion. But despite this diplomatic type of setup, there would still be political clashes between the Germans and the British. The British had a goal of wanting a continuous empire from Cairo in Egypt to Cape Town in South Africa, but the Germans established the colony of German East Africa in modern-day Tanzania, severing that goal in the middle. The coast of German East Africa was controlled by the Sultanate of Zanzibar, established on the nearby island of the same name. Once Germany took those coastal territories, they naturally wanted to control Zanzibar Island itself. It was a wealthy island, it had a nice strategic location, why not? However, the British also saw value in the island. For now, these conflicting interests left Zanzibar alone as neutral middle ground. Meanwhile, back in Europe, Germany was attempting to build a navy that could rival the British Navy. While the effort was small at first, it did bring Heligoland back into question. If there was to be a check against the German fleet, Heligoland wasn't developed enough and therefore couldn't serve as an effective forward base if naval warfare broke out with the Germans. But from the German perspective, overcoming the British would be extremely difficult if they could station the bulk of their navy so close to the British just right there off their own coastline. There was also, of course, the nationalist claims on the island, as aside from its geographical proximity to Germany, the German national anthem Deutschlandlied was written on the island. However, a solution for both the Zanzibar and Heligoland issues would be reached in 1890 with the Heligoland-Zanzibar Treaty. In exchange for the Germans allowing the British to take Zanzibar, Germany would be given the Caprivi Strip off of Namibia, and then also the Heligoland Islands, putting Britain's control of the islands at an end after 83 years of British rule. This, of course, would not end Anglo-German rivalry, not by a long shot. If anything, it exceeded it, as the Germans did end up turning Heligoland into the fortified naval base that the British never truly did. Once Germany's navy did start to actually rival the British Navy, there were expectations that there would be a grand naval battle between the British and German fleets in the North Sea should war ever break out, and Heligoland would be a big part of it. When World War I did finally break out in 1914, outside of the 1916 Battle of Jutland, which ended in an inconclusive draw, there wasn't really a grand naval clash like expected. But this was not the end of Heligoland's potential. During World War II, the Nazis still used Heligoland as a naval base, which resulted in numerous air raids by the British. Upon Nazi Germany's defeat in 1945, though, Germany was partitioned into 4 Allied occupied zones, and Heligoland was within the British zone. However, rather than keeping Heligoland as a naval base, Britain was determined that Heligoland should never be a major naval base again, and in 1947 they conducted Operation Big Bang, which blew up the military fortifications on the islands with 6,700 metric tons of explosives, which at the time was the largest man-made explosion with non-nuclear devices. The scars of this explosion can be seen today with a crater left in the main island's center. West Germany gained independence from the British, French, and American occupation zones in 1949, but the British still held on to Heligoland for a few more years, but finally returning it in 1952. Today, Heligoland is a nice tourist destination, no longer the strategic island it once was, but I did find it fascinating how it once had the potential of being a second Gibraltar. I'm Emperor Tigerstar, and I'll see you guys next time.